Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Well, as I started pulling out books to hold in front of the camera today, as I share my potential TBR with you, I realized that I may have filled my plate with more than I can eat. So I've decided that today I'm only going to show some books I'm prioritizing, often because of buddy reads or reading events, although I may mention a few related choices as well. To be honest, between serious seasonal allergies, the side effects of a shingles vaccine, and a bit of travel, along with some complicated responsibilities, I've not gotten as much serious reading done in these first days of the month as I was hoping. But let me go through what might be on my docket. First, let me start with a set of books by one particular author. Sarah at Hardcover Hearts has organized one of her author spotlight events. And this series is about the mid-20th century Irish-British author Elizabeth Bowen. I've read very little Bowen before, but I know she was much admired by, and in fact, actually friends with, one of my favorite authors, Eudora Welty, from the American South. Bowen said, pretty famously, that she's interested in what she called life with the lid on, and what happens when the lid comes off. I think that vision is not totally dissimilar to Welty's, actually, perhaps especially in her novels. And that contrasts quite a bit with one of the other famous Southern women writers of the same era, Carson McCullers, someone I've mentioned several times recently because of the new biography of her. McCullers writes far more about characters creating lives for themselves on the outskirts, on the margins of society. While I find her books fascinating, I'm far more drawn to the quiet books of Welty and Bowen. Quiet, yes, but not actually less intense. But back to the Bowen read-along for a moment. My fellow readers are just an amazing group. A few people with channels and several really brilliant regular commenters, as well as some really thoughtful readers who are newer to me as well. We'll be reading several of her novels and short stories, but not all. We've just completed her first novel, The Hotel, and the conversation so far has been astoundingly wonderful. Next, we'll be reading The Last September, and then at the end of the month, we'll start The House in Paris. Okay, recently one of my academic friends mentioned a brand new book written by a colleague of his, and it immediately attracted my attention. The book is called Write Like a Man, Jewish Masculinity and the New York Intellectuals, written by Ronnie Grinberg. I immediately tried to find a copy, sort of assuming that the book would touch not just on the intellectuals, but on the novelists, like Philip Roth, who I've often called mid-century misogynist. Incidentally, I know someone left me a comment sometime when I was absolutely buried in non-BookTube stuff that mentioned that someone else used that phrase regularly. If you happen to be watching, would you please speak up in the comments so I can learn more? Anyway, those novelists are not central to this book. Instead, the author focuses almost exclusively on the group of Jewish intellectuals from Irving Howe to Lionel Trilling. She explains that this set of authors essentially recreates an idea of Jewish identity and also a new kind of masculinity that diverges quite a bit from more popular general American ideas of masculinity. Interestingly, the circle of thinkers actively participating in this group, or authors heavily influenced by this group, include both non-Jewish authors, including James Baldwin and Ralph Ellison, among others, and non-male authors, including perhaps most importantly, Hannah Arendt. I'm excited to read more of this book, and maybe even write a formal review of it for Open Letters Review, edited by our own Steve Donahue. I think I may also be writing a review there of another academic book, Natural Magic, about the ways Emily Dickinson and Charles Darwin's deep love of the natural world fit with what the subtitle refers to as the dawn of modern science. It sounds absolutely fascinating. And while I'm quite familiar with Emily Dickinson's commitment to her garden, I need to do a little background work on Darwin before I'll feel prepared to review a book like this, I think. Interestingly, I think Write Like a Man and Natural Magic are both published by Princeton University Press. I haven't yet received a copy of Natural Magic, but Write Like a Man arrived just at the moment that the sharp young booktuber Joe Spivey announced that he was planning to do a slow read-along of Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. Initially published in 1963 as a series of articles in the periodical The New Yorker, Eichmann in Jerusalem is Arendt's response to the Israeli trial of a German Nazi leader, a man often portrayed as one of the masterminds of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. The author, herself raised as a German Jew but escaping in the early 1930s, was an anti-Zionist. And her writing about the Eichmann trial caused an absolute uproar at the time, and pretty much now too, perhaps especially in the Jewish community, for reasons beyond just her anti-Zionism. Joe has already discussed the first couple of chapters of this book over on his channel, and you should go check it out if you haven't already. I may not talk about it until the end of the read-along, but I'm not quite sure yet. Another BookTube event I want to participate in is Misery May, hosted by Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot and Gemma at Gem of Books. Clearly, Eichmann in Jerusalem will be an interesting nonfiction choice, and I have several other possibilities as well, although I won't be able to get to all of them. One is Blake Butler's Molly. This is a memoir of an author whose wife died of suicide, and in the aftermath, as he was grieving her loss, he discovered aspects of her life that she'd hidden, and his understanding of her, as well as his understanding of their relationship, was dramatically altered. This book has gotten pretty complicated reviews, pointing out that the author has shared intimate details that Molly had deliberately kept private. And in the process, even though we might feel sorry for the author or feel like he was a victim in some ways, we also might feel that he's betrayed her, or even feel that he's putting these disturbing stories out there just for attention. I'm not certain this will be the book for me. Not because it's about misery, which I rather love in both novels and memoirs, but because it's potentially also about anger. Another choice for Misery May could be Sloane Crosley's Grief is for People, another memoir about living past the loss of a loved one to suicide. This book has gotten many really wonderful reviews, many of which point out that in addition to being heartbreaking, it's often full of joy and even laughter. Having lost both my life partner of 3 decades and my mother this year, both to cancer rather than suicide, I'm continually amazed at how much joy and humor, and not just sadness, fill my days, including the moments when I'm missing them most intensely. So this might be a good choice for me. I want to mention 2 other books that I don't have access to at the moment. One is the novel Trondheim by Cormac James, published I think this past February. The plot revolves around 2 mothers who sit by the bedside of their son, who is in a coma and on life support in an intensive care unit. And it considers how their own individual responses affect their relationship to each other, as well as to the strain of going through this kind of crisis and how that affects them. I'm quite drawn to this kind of together but also apart narrative of a partnership. And also, I'm pretty sure it was Gemma who told me I might like Intervals by Mariane Brooker, also published in February, which definitely does sound like a perfect book for me. I gather this is a combination of memoir and a sort of thought piece, or even feminist polemic about the end-of-life care, from living wills to hospice care, from death doulas to patients' right to end their life in the face of terminal illness and suffering. I have one more book to mention, and that's The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, which I had the great pleasure to be buddy reading this month with Roz at Scally Downey About the Books. Actually, in her recent video, she mentioned that this novel is also a great entry from Misery May. I'm hoping to talk a lot more about James and about this particular novel as the month goes on, so I think I will leave it at that for now. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I have a large stack of books I've been reading recently but haven't yet talked about here on BookTube, and I promise to try to get to them sometime. And I still have a few tags I really want to answer. So, if I can get past the misery of my spring allergies, etc., I hope to see you again very soon here on Hannah's Books.